Hey guys, it's me again. My name is Jose Perez Clara. I'm a data management application engineer here at KETIV. I've been here for a while, 6 years collectively. And yeah, we're going to go over the different settings that you have and different tools that you have in Vault Professional and how you can leverage them to benefit your workflow or fit your workflow within your company. So moving along here, today we're going to go over a few things. So lifecycle configuration, category configuration, and revision, where that is inside of the Vault Professional, how to get there, and the different things that you can do and how they benefit you or would benefit your engineering workflow. Duplicate part cleanup. So this is something that was introduced in recent years with Vault Professional, not to be confused with duplicate name, which has been in Vault Professional for a while now, where you could look at the files that have the same name within Vault and kind of whittle down that list. This is more based on geometry, and we'll talk about it there. Reporting, something that gets overlooked a lot of the times inside of Vault, but we found some that they can be very useful. And then server and replication. So this is if you're on the back end of Vault and are looking at the infrastructure, setting up your Vault if you don't have it yet, or upgrading to a new version. Some of the things that you should look out for and keep in mind while you go through that. So first, we're going to talk about lifecycle categories and revisions. And those of you that are familiar with Vault Professional, you'll know that this is the engineering workflow portion of the Vault Professional capabilities. Essentially, when working with these three things, with lifecycles, categories, and revisions, what we typically like to do before that is actually map out your workflow. So a lot of the times, whether you're a small company or a large company, you want to make sure that the workflow that you're using is standardized across the board. Whether you're including document control, the machine shop, engineering, quality, things like that. You want to make sure, all right, who's going to touch this engineering data and at what point do they need to touch it? A lot of the times what we end up doing is actually mapping out, the states that the files need to be in, work in progress, review, and released are very, very common states for engineering data, as well as quick change and obsolete. So Vault is able to create, comes with those states already created, because a lot of the times our customers do use those. So all three of these tools are in the same location within Vault. So if you go to Tools, Administration, and Vault Settings, and then the Behaviors tab is where we'll be working with this. And as you could have guessed, if you're going into the administration area, you'll need to have the administrator role within Vault for your company. So, if it's a brand new Vault, it's pretty easy to give that to yourself. But if it's a Vault that's been standing for a while, you might need to work with your current CAD admin to get access to here and kind of take a look. But like I mentioned, if we're looking at life cycles here, a flexible release process is what comes with the Vault by default here. And these are the states that it comes with. That does not mean you have to use these states. These are just the commonly used ones. So if you, especially on the verbiage, a lot of these, if you edit the life cycle, you'll notice that you're able to change this stuff, change these names. Instead of release, do you use approved? Perfect. You can go ahead and change that. When experimenting with these life cycles, though, we recommend creating a copy of them. So that way, it'll keep the states and the permissions that it originally came programmed with or included, but you're just giving it a new name. So this piece, life cycle, will be the one I'm going to name it here. And then you can make this decision now if you know which categories you're going to be using. And we're going to be talking about categories in a little bit here, but if you already have that category created, you can assign it. I know I want this to apply to my engineering category and files. Same thing, you could apply it to items here. There are some default item lifecycles that come. But in this case, we're going to be working with file categories, and I wanted to apply it to this engineering one. We'll see what that means in a little bit. As far as security, you can, there's two options that you have, combining or overriding. Typically by default, combining kind of allows more freedom with those permissions. And override makes it more rigid there. So, and again, these states that you have, typically before you even make it into the vault here to configure these things, you want to make sure that you map that workflow out so that you're creating a map, a literal map of the states, the transition. So, you know, when it goes from when it's in the work in progress state, where do you want it to go? Can it go directly to release? A lot of the times it can't. You know, you definitely want it to be reviewed by a peer or by a different group. You would go ahead and set that up within the transitions tab, which we'll go into right now. But you want to make sure you have all that information so that when you come into Vault, you're literally just configuring to that map, and it makes it a lot easier to keep track of and kind of confirm, all right, is this the workflow that we mapped out? If not, then you know, you can adjust it as you go. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply here to save my life cycle. It now exists in my Vault. And then, like I said, from your map, you're basically going to be reading the states that you're going to go into. So, you know, that would be the first thing. You would name all your states or even create new states if they don't exist. Let's say you have, you know, at some point your quality team needs to see it and only they can see it, or they need to push it forward within Vault. You would create that state, give it a description. So quality review, something along those lines. You know, different teams may need to touch it. You'll create those states and give those names here. You can also associate a color to it. If you don't have to sort everything by the state name itself. Some people like to sort it by colors, and that's actually a new functionality in 2023. So, you know, something you could adjust here. Next, we're going to talk about transitions. So this is, again, going from your roadmap, you want to clarify and establish which states can go where, essentially. So by default, Vault allows us to make the transitions to any state. As you can see here, for every state we have created, it'll create a transition for each state. And essentially, for the ones that you want to happen, you would come in here and edit the transition. There's a few tabs in here that you'll make changes to. For example, for when you're going from work in progress to review, a lot of the times our customers want to ensure that the data that they're moving forward is clean and it's good. That may require properties to be filled in or not have a certain value associated to it. You know, material, you don't want it to be generic. You want it to be an actual material within Inventor. So that can be some of the criteria you can set. You have a number of different properties you can apply this to, but the biggest one is usually property compliance, and just means, hey, are all the properties that need to be filled in? And if they are, this little red tag that you see on the right hand side, that should be gone. The files that are in the background here, it looks like they're missing some properties. So if I were to try to move this forward from work in progress to review, it wouldn't let me. It would say, hey, some of these properties aren't compliant. Actions. So there's certain actions that can be done by certain item types inside of Vault. So files, folders, custom objects, and items. Since we're working with files, we'll go ahead and sort it, filter it to files, and these are the ones we can do. While we're going from work in progress to review, you'll notice that we don't want to bump the primary revision. This is typically reserved for going from released back to work in progress. You know, when you want that revision to change, or you want it to bump, that's when you would apply this. But you know, sometimes if it goes into review and then it comes back into work in progress, some of our customers like to keep that as a secondary revision bump, right? Well, you can set that up here, secondary or tertiary, depending on what you're using. This synchronized properties one. So if you're using the revision block, if you're using certain properties in your title block that need to be updated after the fact, maybe, once it goes into review, the drawing itself typically is locked in review so that everybody can review the same things. You want synchronize properties, update view, and PDF. This will allow you to update the properties in those title blocks without having someone physically, like someone manually check out the file. This will all be taken care of through the job server. And that's one of the perks of Vault Professional is you get that job processor set up. It does require an additional license or to run it efficiently. Typically, it does require an additional license. But you get the benefit of having those jobs offloaded somewhere else. The other two checks here are to check to see if dependent children are released. So that's typically, when you're going from for review into released, this is typically something you would check. And then same thing here with children are not obsolete. You want to make sure that none of the designs you're pushing through have obsolete parts in it. Because of course, if something's obsolete, then it's probably not available. And you can't build something, you can't obtain parts that aren't available to build. So something to keep in mind here. And again, keep these in mind when you're building out your map. You can draw out your states and like physically draw the lines from one state to the other and put the requirements on there. Like sometimes, like maybe the property compliancy typically is from work in progress to review. Work in progress, it's easier to update these properties for the users. You wouldn't typically put it for review over to release because the assumption would be that properties were already compliant when it went into review and they didn't change after that. Custom job types, a lot of the times here is automation that gets created in some of our customers' cases, like PDF, like specific PDF generation, bundling, collating, things like that. It's an automation service that we can provide. So if again, if you add one of those custom job types, you would add it in here and it would send that job type to the job processor to kind of grab and process. So this is where you would do that thing. And again, you would do it for the state transitions that you want it to happen during. And then finally, at the end, again, is security. Who can make this transition? Typically you only have to worry about the groups that have access to the full client. So if they're logging in through the thick client here, you want to take a look at your groups and see which groups can log in again. And then out of those groups that can log in, who do you want making this transition from work in progress to review? There's really no harm typically. So that's why by default, it has no restrictions. It lets anybody push it through. And then you would add the restrictions on the for review state when it goes into released. But yeah, so that would be your transitions. That's how you would basically, again, with that map, very, very important. With that map, you can go through each transition and let's say work in progress to obsolete is not allowed. So typically we would come in here and add the everyone group and say deny. And this would stop anybody from putting it from work in progress into obsolete automatically. So that's how you would pick and choose which transitions can happen. A couple questions here. Is the color option for different states only available in Vault Pro 2023? I'm using 2022 and not seeing the option. That's correct. It was something that was added recently for Vault Professional 2023. So, getting those colors to show up would be one of the things. I will have to leave, but I have a bad internet connection, but I wanted to ask how to unobsolete a drawing. Perfect. Yeah, so that's one of the things we can look at here. So if typically when unobsoleting a drawing, you have to put it through a review process again. You don't want to unobsolete it straight into released automatically. So what you would do is find the transition from obsolete to work in progress and make sure that it can happen, right? So in this case, anybody can put it back into work in progress. In your environment, if you already have it in an obsolete state, it means someone did some configuration already. I would check and see who can send it back to work in progress. And what you do there is typically it would bump the revision of the obsolete part, and then you would go through the design process again after that point and have it released again. The other thing you can configure with states is permissions. So, while the files are in these states, what can people do? So typically the four options that you get, again, depending, the newer, I believe it started in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, they got the ability to determine who can download files as well. That was one of the big asks that our customers got, was controlling who can download files. If you have certain groups, outside of the office or vendors and such, you don't want them downloading the native CAD files. You can control that. So that's one of the things you can select: deleting, modifying, and read. This would be like, while the file's in this state, this is the first check you'll go through. If you don't have this, this option allowed to delete, it'll automatically flag you. Otherwise, if this is allowed for you, it'll let you try to delete it, and then it'll check, dependencies with other assemblies and whether or not the files have been released in the past already. So, there's levels to deleting, not just whether or not, you have that permission. Vault has kind of contingency plans to make sure that files are safe. But you, again, with that roadmap, you go through each state that you've created and make sure that, the appropriate people have access to do certain things in these states, and you would go ahead and send that through. Next tab over here is released and obsolete state as far as control. You noticed when we were looking at the transitions, one of the actions that you could do is make sure that these files aren't obsolete, make sure that the children are released. And that means, like, are the children going to a release state? If you're releasing an assembly with its children at the same time, it takes that into consideration. The children don't all have to be released before you release the top level assembly. If they're all going at the same time, it's smart enough to know that you're releasing everything at the same time. But if you're not releasing the children and they're currently in a work in progress state or a review state, you'll see that none of these are checked. But for a release state, this is what it's checking for. You can have multiple release states at that point. If you select them in here, you can give like quick change of release state. Not that you have to or it's recommended at that point, but that's what those flags do for you here. And again, the obsolete one is the same, where if a file has been obsolete, you don't want it to be part of a newest release. So you would go ahead and check that out for the parts that are obsolete. As far as controlled versions here, what it means is, while a file is in this state, which versions of the file do you want to keep? Typically for release, you want to keep all of them, because if it's been released, it's been approved, it's an important revision release, you want to keep all of those. But for work in progress, if you make 30 changes while it's in work in progress, maybe the most important ones for you are the first one. So like when it first goes into work in progress, and the last one before it leaves into a review state. So that's what the controlled versions are. And that means you won't be able to purge them or delete them from the history, and you'll have to work with that. And then the last one here is comments. So a lot of the times when it goes into a certain state and you're making the transition from one state to another, the comment will automatically be filled out. And this is important just, for version keeping within Vault, but also if you're using a rev table and you're mapping it to your drawings, when it goes through the release process and it updates that rev table, it'll use this comment to fill in that rev table. So you can go ahead and do that depending on what you're trying to put in that rev table. You can add, remove certain comments and give them options. So you'll be able to update that as needed. And go ahead and hit apply, and we'll talk about categories now that we have our life cycle set up here. Categories here. Or actually, before we jump into that, just because revisions fall into categories, let's go over revisions. Vault Professional comes with 3 default revision schemes that you can use: alphabetic, numeric, and ASME. ASME, for those that can't use I or O, it excludes that in here, depending on the standards that you have to use with your drawings or your revisions. You can use one of these. Alphabetic, of course, will just include every single letter. But it comes with all of these standard 3 schemes, but then from those schemes, you can actually create new ones and then kind of apply those as you want. So if there are certain letters that your company specifically skips, if yours starts with a PR for pre-release, that's the revision that you start with, and it kind of bumps up once it gets released. You can set that up through revisions. You go ahead and create a new revision scheme, as you can see here, and a new scheme format as well. The scheme format is actually what controls that revision scheme here. So, if you want to copy it, if your scheme is identical to an alphabetic, but it has a pre-release, you can go ahead and copy it from the alphabetic one and add your pre-release, to be the first one. Oh, it looks like because of how it's set up here, PR is already in here. So what we do is kind of remove that and move it up. You can go ahead and choose how your revisions want to follow. And then once you have the schemes that you need, like I mentioned, Vault Professional uses primary, secondary, and tertiary. You can, if your secondary scheme is numeric, you can go ahead and change it here, and you'll see that it'll give you an update as to how your secondary revisions will look, and then your tertiary as well. You can go ahead and change that around and apply that to the files that you want. Maybe you want your documents to follow numeric, but you want your engineering files to follow alphabetic. That can be set up, and that's why we're going to look at categories here. So if we look at different categories, you can have categories for the different objects that you have in Vault Professional. Again, we're working with files. So these are the default categories in here. Our engineering files, which is our CAD files. We talked about that earlier as life cycles. Do I want it available for engineering? Yeah, well, there's that KVA lifecycle we created. If we look at Office Standard or any of the other ones here, you'll notice that KVA doesn't show up, and that's because when I created my KVA lifecycle, I made sure that it's only applicable to engineering. If I wanted to be the default, I would come into Assign here and then apply it here. And you'll see that it goes, I can make KVA. You see I created one in my masterclass last week. So that's the one that it's currently using. Revisions, again, if you want to assign a specific revision scheme that you created, you can come in here and assign it and add it to the list, and then you'll pick the default revision scheme that gets applied. So these defaults happen when a file goes into a category for the first time. So you'll see that base has none kind of associated to it. So no revisions, no life cycles. That means if a file falls into a base category, it doesn't have these permissions associated to it automatically. But as soon as it goes into engineering category from base, it'll get put into this masterclass lifecycle as well as this revision scheme. Those all get applied to it. And that's the first time it gets applied to it. If it already has a life cycle associated to it and a revision scheme, and then you move it to a separate category that has different options, you'll have to manually go in there and actually assign it to those new life cycles, changing the state or changing the category first, probably to get those new values to populate, and then changing the revision and the life cycle. And then properties is the last thing you can do. So, your engineering files may need certain things, again, material and such associated to it and required, but your Office documents won't need material. They don't have a material. So you can pick and choose what properties associated to it. That was, again, it's KVA, so we're limited on time. So a lot to get through here, but we did pretty good time here. Any questions that you guys have, again, send them into either the Q&A or the chat. We'll be looking at both of those. And then if I can't get to those during the presentation, we'll be sure to reach out afterwards. Duplicate part cleanup, just to keep it moving here. Again, not to be confused with duplicate names. So duplicate part cleanup is a section in Vault Professional that you'll see. It's called the duplicates dashboard. So if I come in here, I have already set it up within my environment to kind of show me the duplicates that I have within my Vault. But the way that it works is you tell Vault which folder you want to look in. So, you can do the whole Vault at once if you really want to. It may take a little longer to index, but you can also work folder by folder. And what's nice is, you tell it when you set it up, you go to tools again, administration, Vault settings. And under duplicate search settings, you would go ahead and come in here and configure. So I have it looking through my designs folder, which is, where my engineering files typically live. So, by default, if you come in here, it'll be disabled. You want to go ahead and enable it and tell it a folder to look in. Once you tell it a folder to look in, what it'll do is, like, depending on how large that folder is, it'll, and you see it apply changes, even though there are none right now. But typically, depending on the size of the folder, it'll send multiple jobs to your job queue. And let's see if it, excuse my unmanaged job queue here. I haven't turned it on in a while. But this indexing job that you see here, that's actually what the duplicate dashboard will do the first time around. It'll kind of tell you, hey, this is files 1 through 50, files 50 through 100. Depending on how large your folder is that you're working with, it'll add more and more jobs kind of to get through. And what it's doing when it's indexing is it's looking at the geometry of the files and comparing it. Essentially, it's kind of indexing within the Vault to be able to compare down the line. And that's when it's able to do this, it's kind of able to look at all the files that you've told it to do and compile a list or a report of them. And that's where you would come into this duplicates dashboard and view the duplicates report. Again, it may take a while to index depending on the size, but once it's done, it'll break it out into groups of geometries. So it'll tell you, like, all these 4 files have the same geometry, but it leaves it up to you to pick the one that will replace the rest if possible. And B, if you even want to change it. Some of these are mirror parts in here. Do I want to change them? Do I want to keep them? Kind of things. So you can actually, export this report to PDF, Word, or Excel to kind of keep track and go through. But once you have that list to work by, you can come into the Project Explorer, find the parts, and do either a select the file. So okay, so once you select the file, you'll have the option to I swear it's in here. Replace. Sorry, it's under edit. Edit, replace. With the replace function, what you can do is it'll search for all the instances this file is used in the Vault, and you would give it a file to replace it with. Tricky part there is if the file is oriented differently, or in this case, we know the geometries are the same, but if you replace it with a part that doesn't have that same geometry, it'll break all your constraints. So, be wary of that when you're working with it. This is just one way you can do it. The other way would be to open up the kind of the where used of the files you're trying to replace and do a replace from Vault. But it helps you, if your Vault was implemented a while ago and you had duplicate file names turned off, or it wasn't enforced before, this is a good way to kind of go through and be like, even if they're not named the same, you can check the geometry as you go. Again, enable it first in the Vault. If you want to work with it, you'll need the job processor to index it. So, if it's something that you want to run, immediately, and you don't have a job processor, with your Vault client, you do get a job processor installed. The only thing is it'll use up your resources. So while it's processing jobs, your computer may be a little slow. So that's one of the things kind of when we say running the job processor properly, you kind of want a separate machine with a separate license that is not affecting any of your users. Report based on geometry, again, not to be confused with the unique file naming within Vault. This is all based on geometry of the part. And then to clean it up, replace within Vault or an Inventor. So whichever one works best for you, you can go ahead and do that. And I forgot to mention it, but as you work through your duplicates, this number will go down. So, you can keep track of it that way and see how many duplicates you have in your Vault so far. Reporting. So again, it gets overlooked, reporting within Vault, which is kind of weird to me because one of the I guess most powerful tools within Vault is to find. So the search, you set all the criteria. It's as powerful or as constricting as you want it to be. So that's one of the things I always warn. Like you can add as many criteria as you want, but as soon as you go one too many or it doesn't find any results, it won't return any because with the search it's the way I like to think of it. So it's one criteria and the next and the next. So kind of narrows down your results. Just be careful not to narrow it too much. But with each search, what you can do is actually run a report. So when you in the find tool, you'll have this report button and you'll have an option of which template to use. And the templates these are the default templates. And the templates that you use will depend on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to see which files are in work in progress, based on the user that has it checked out or the user that is making edits, you can go ahead and sort it by lifecycle. You can say, well, most of this user's parts are in review, which means he's done all the work that he needs to. What's the bottleneck there? What's stopping it from going to release? When you're working with ECOs and you want to know, within Vault, like which state are all my ECOs going into? Again, you're able to find these bottlenecks and try to. It's easier to find a way to alleviate them. So as you are searching through these things, you can and reporting on them. It's easier to see these things in graphs and in numbers. So here, let me see if I do a change order and find them now. I should have a bunch of change orders. I can run a report on these change orders by state and then run that report. It'll show me, again, work, close, create, review. I have an easy list of all these ECOs that are in each state. And again, if most of them are in create and I know like when they're in create, they need to be pushed into work. Well, who's in charge of that? Who needs to, why are they all there? When were they submitted? When are they due? Things like that. It's a tool again that gets overlooked, and you're able to leverage it. I feel with as an admin within Vault, especially if you're a CAD admin. A lot of these times, like you're in charge of making sure that everything's working efficiently. Yes, maybe the workflow itself is your ideal workflow, but it's not being picked up by your users. It's not being picked up by your engineers. This is a good way to kind of get insight on where it's being clogged up, who's not pushing things forward, or maybe they need help. Maybe they're backed up. If everything is on their shoulders right now, you can have someone alleviate them the pressure on them, and you can use reports to kind of keep track of that. Week by week, you can run the report and save it just like we did with the duplicates report, and kind of keep track of those. Even store them within Vault so that they're being backed up recently, or every time the Vault's backed up. But again, reporting comes with default templates. You can set up the criteria. That search tool, that find tool is so powerful within Vault. Again, especially if it's set up properly with all the necessary properties applied to your files, the necessary properties being required, you can search by project. You can search by whatever properties you have available to you or are important to you, and then run reports on those files themselves. Especially if you want to check on a certain project specifically, and project is filled in on all the CAD and all the drawings, search for all the files related to that project and then run a report. You'll see exactly where they are and what you need to do, or maybe what you need to work on in that environment. And then you can create and modify the templates. You'll need some knowledge on I can't remember exactly the language that it uses, but they are modifiable and you can create your own at that point, but it requires a little bit more in-depth knowledge of how those reporting templates work. And then server and replication. A lot of you guys on these calls already have a server set up, have either a replicated environment set up already. But some of you might not. Some of you may be like in a VPN situation and things like that. So just something to keep in mind here when working with servers is, even if you're working on an upgrade, a lot of times what stops some of our customers from moving forward is, their server may be too old. Maybe it's like getting to end of life. So some things you want to keep in mind here is Windows OS. So the operating system for Windows. If you're running Vault Professional, which, we're talking about this class, typically you actually do need to run it on a Windows Server OS. So, during the maintenances that we do through Vault as a Service and Vault Data Management for our customers is, we keep track of the OS. Sometimes it changes, sometimes, it doesn't, they upgrade it. So we keep track of the OS, we keep track of the SQL that they're using. One of the things I do is I have my little cheat sheet here to make sure that I know what version of SQL kind of corresponds to what. And if they're looking to do an upgrade, we make sure that we either upgrade their SQL to make sure that it's within specs, or if it fits within the system requirements, we usually leave it alone. And then drive space. So if you're working on a single server and looking at drive space, typically we want to make sure that you have enough for your files to grow, as well as to keep a couple backups on hand, kind of like a cascading there. You want to make sure that your server doesn't fill up, because as soon as your server fills up, you can't add files to Vault anymore, and you're kind of on how would you just describe it? Everything seems to be a lot more in a hurry once you hit that cap. So keep an eye on that drive space. You want to make sure that you're expanding that drive or getting more drives as you move forward. We have customers with 2.4 terabyte file stores, 3 terabyte file stores. They get up there, but we're able to expand those drives to make sure that they're going. And then replication. So you have a couple different types of replication. You have file store replication, which some of our customers are on, where the biggest thing that they need to transfer over are the files themselves. So they just store them on a server closer to another group that maybe works with them or is part of the same company, but doesn't have access to the main server. And that saves time, connecting from one state to another. Those files can transfer out very slowly. So if that's a scenario that you may be facing, think about file replication. You can copy those files over to a more local server that they can download them faster from. And then you have full replication, where you still have a publisher, you have a made server, but you will also set up a secondary server closer to the secondary location with full SQL, full file store, everything, that kind of process or that kind of setup. And they would constantly communicate back and forth through SQL. For that kind of replication, you would need a full, like a standard license of SQL or an enterprise license of SQL. So there is a price upkeep on there for those licenses to keep in mind. The other option that we offer, again, I mentioned Vault as a Service earlier, and that's where we would host your cloud, your server up in the cloud. The server would be available to all your other users, regardless of what state they're in, and they'll be able to log into the Vault that way. So we made it 43 minutes. yeah, it's a lot to go through. A lot of this stuff you can go more in depth on, you know, it's for your specific environments and how you want those to work. But, you know, for server and replication here, Windows OS and SQL are the two main things that you're looking at for system requirements. You want to make sure that you have enough drive space. And then depending on whether or not, you know, you have multiple sites, multiple people in different locations, you want to look at the best way to get them connected to the vault. Going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. You know, we had a couple earlier that I was able to answer, but if there's any right now that I can jump into, go ahead and let me know. I'll have a couple minutes here to answer those for you guys. Looks like I'm waiting a couple more minutes here, but looks like we might be pretty much done here. Yeah, so I'm gonna, and of course, if you do come up with some questions or you have any other questions, you know, come up after the webinar, go ahead and reach out to our support team. They're pretty good to answering the questions, and if they need to escalate to one of the data management team, they'll go ahead and do that for you guys. But I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. I don't see any questions coming in here. And thanks for stopping by again. I hope to work with you guys soon. If I don't already, I know there's some customers in here that I work with regularly, but you know, reach out, and thanks, Brian. I always look for your comment at the very end, making sure I did a good job. But I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for jumping on. Bye, guys.